In the early 19th century, the greatest naval power in the South China Sea was neither the British Empire nor the Qing dynasty fleet. It was an armada of 1,800 ships and 80,000 men. For comparison, Admiral Nelson's fleet at the famous Battle of Trafalgar consisted of only 27 ships. This force, capable of wiping coastal cities off the map, was commanded by a former Canton prostitute named Ching Shih. This is the story of how a woman from the very bottom of society built an empire that made true empires tremble. To understand how this became possible, we need to look at China in the late 18th century. The Qing Empire, under Emperor Qing, was a colossus with feet of clay, plagued by corruption and rebellions. European powers, primarily Britain, aggressively imported opium through the so-called Canton system, fueling a drug epidemic and draining silver from the country. For millions of peasants, it was a time of hunger and hopelessness. In such conditions, piracy became not just a crime, but a form of social protest, and the only chance for survival, a kind of wild east. It was here, in Canton's floating brothels, the famous flower boats on the Pearl River, that our heroine's journey began. These were not mere dens of iniquity, but complex social institutions, a blend of salon, spy hub, and black market exchange. Here, the young Shuxianggu, as she was truly named, learned not only the art of seduction, but also psychology, manipulation, and business dealings. Her future seemed predetermined, a decline into poverty and death. But she saw in her clients merchants, officials, and smugglers, not just men, but carriers of power and invaluable information. And a bearer of such power soon appeared. In 1801, Zheng Yi, the most formidable pirate in the South China Sea and commander of the Red Flag Fleet, entered her life. The story of their meeting is shrouded in mystery. Some sources claim he simply abducted Canton's most renowned beauty. Others suggest she initiated the arrangement herself. But the legend that best explains subsequent events states that Shuxianggu agreed to become his wife only on her own terms. She demanded an official marriage and a legal contract granting her 50% control over the entire fleet and an equal share of the spoils. This was her first step from the shadows to the captain's bridge, a kind of prenuptial agreement where the assets were an entire pirate armada. On board, she quickly proved that her greatest assets were not beauty, but cold calculation and organizational talent. Using the psychological skills honed on the flower boats, Ching Shih became an indispensable diplomat and mediator among the volatile captains who had previously feuded for years. She was not merely the admiral's wife, but his full partner, the operational director of this gigantic corporation of chaos. She managed finances, planned logistics, and established a system of fair distribution of plunder, which was key to maintaining discipline. It was she who helped transform disparate gangs into a unified, cohesive force. The Red Flag Fleet was just the flagship. Under their command also operated the black, white, blue, yellow, and green fleets. This system of colored flags functioned like a military franchise. Each squadron had its admiral and its area of responsibility, but all adhered to a single code and the supreme command of Zheng Yi and Ching Shih. This was not a gang, but a proto-state with its own hierarchy. But on November 16, 1807, everything could have collapsed. During a sudden typhoon off the coast of Vietnam, Zheng Yi perished. For the pirate world, this was a standard situation. After the leader's death, The confederation should have disintegrated in a bloody power struggle, just as any gang crumbles after its chieftain's demise. Everyone expected chaos and internecine conflict, but they severely underestimated his widow. For Ching Shih, this was not the end. It was the beginning of her sole rule. In this power vacuum, she acted instantly and ruthlessly. First, Ching Shih forged an alliance with the most influential man remaining in the fleet, her late husband's adopted son, the young and charismatic Captain Zhang Baozai. He was a favorite among the pirates, a fearless fighter. By making him her lover and officially appointing him commander of the fleet, she achieved everything with one brilliant move. She secured his personal loyalty, the allegiance of his men, and a formal male leader who would mask her singular authority. The Confederation's disintegration was averted. However, her primary tool of governance was not seduction, but law. Ching Shih implemented a brutally strict code which was written down and disseminated to every captain. Some of its provisions were astonishing in their foresight. All plunder, without exception, was to be submitted to a common treasury. A pirate who captured a vessel received 20%, with the remaining 80% going into the general fund. Unauthorized absence from a ship was punishable by having one's ears cut off in front of the entire crew. But the most revolutionary clause concerned female captives. Rape of a captured woman was punishable by immediate death. This law transformed a mob of brigands into a disciplined army, and this system worked. The centralized treasury became a kind of bank and insurance company. These funds paid for ship repairs, purchased provisions and weapons, and even provided compensation for the wounded. Pirates now knew that loyal service would bring a fair reward, while rule-breaking would result in inevitable and brutal punishment. Ching Shih governed not so much through fear as through predictability and order. This was her genius, completely shattering the stereotype of piratical anarchy. Soon, her fleet was not merely raiding. It created a shadow economic empire. Any merchant vessel wishing to pass through the South China Sea had to purchase a special pass, a safety passport from Madame Zheng. Those who refused became legitimate prey. Entire coastal villages and towns paid her tribute, essentially a tax for protection from other pirates and, of course, from herself. She gained control over the salt trade and key maritime routes, establishing a full-fledged racketeering state with its own tax system. This was not merely a fleet, it was a floating city. Families lived aboard hundreds of ships, children were born, and artisans worked: carpenters, sailmakers, blacksmiths. Boats plied between vessels, forming floating markets where goods and news were exchanged. Ching Shih managed not just an armada, but an entire society with its own infrastructure and daily life, asserting her role not merely as a warrior, but as a ruler. Zhang Baozai was the face of this empire, her fearless field commander who led ships into battle. But behind every one of his victories lay Ching Shih's cold strategic calculation. He was her queen on this bloody chessboard, the most powerful piece, but a piece controlled by her hand. This tandem was incredibly effective, allowing her to rule while formally remaining in the shadows, which was the only way for a woman to hold absolute power in this brutal male world. Such a state of affairs could not last indefinitely. The patience of the imperial court in Beijing ran out. Governor General Bai Ling received a direct order: destroy the pirate plague once and for all. Imperial admirals, confident in the superiority of their warships and discipline, believed they were in for an easy stroll against river bandits. They failed to understand that they were facing not a gang, but a true army. This was their fatal error. Ching Shih allowed the imperial armada to penetrate deep into the network of narrow inlets and straits along the coast. She waited for the right tide, then sprung the trap. Her light and maneuverable junks, whose crews knew every reef and current, surrounded the cumbersome, unwieldy warships. It was a naval version of the Battle of Canton, local knowledge and tactical flexibility against brute force. The Qing dynasty fleet was not just defeated, it was almost entirely captured. Ching Shih augmented her armada with 63 enemy vessels. She offered captured sailors a simple choice: join her or die. Most chose life under her flag. For the empire, this was a catastrophe. Not merely a military defeat, but a public humiliation, a loss of face, a key concept in Chinese culture. The authority of the Son of Heaven had been trampled by a former prostitute. Her power along the coast became absolute. She transformed into the unofficial empress of the South China Sea. But her success threatened more than just China. Her blockade of the Pearl River Delta paralyzed trade, the main artery through which tea and silk flowed west, and British opium flowed into China. The Portuguese from Macau and the powerful British East India Company could not tolerate this. They dispatched their own technologically superior warships to put an end to the pirate queen. The stakes had risen to an international level. Against European frigates with their long-range artillery, Ching Shih's junks stood no chance in open battle. But she had no intention of playing by their rules. She employed wolf pack tactics. Dozens of her ships would attack a single European vessel, boarding it and turning the naval engagement into a bloody hand-to-hand fight on deck, where numerical superiority decided everything. She lured them into shallow waters, where heavy ships ran aground, becoming easy prey. She did not defeat them, but she did not lose either. She made them pay for every inch of the sea with blood, proving that technological superiority does not guarantee victory. By 1810, a strategic stalemate had developed. Ching Shih controlled the coast, but could not dislodge the Europeans from deep waters. The Qing Empire and its Western allies could not destroy her in the coastal labyrinths. The war was draining the Guangdong province treasury. Annual expenses for fighting pirates had long exceeded all revenues. The new governor-general, Zhang Baozai, was a pragmatist. He understood that there was no military solution to this problem, and this realization opened a window for the boldest step in Ching Shih's career: negotiations. The imperial court offered amnesty to all pirates who would lay down their arms. For thousands of ordinary sailors, this was a golden ticket to a normal life, a chance to return home to their villages with money in their pockets. But for the leaders, for Ching Shih herself, it sounded like a death sentence. History offered no examples of a surrendered pirate chieftain meeting anything other than a slow execution in a cage or the hangman's noose. It was a standard trap. However, Ching Shih understood that her floating empire had reached its peak. It was impossible to perpetually fight against the Qing dynasty, the Portuguese, and the British. She saw in the authorities' offer not a threat, but the greatest opportunity of her life, a way to legitimize everything she had conquered. She decided to accept the amnesty, not as a defeated supplicant begging for mercy, but as an equal party dictating her terms. This was her final, most brilliant calculation. The scene of her arrival at the Governor General's residence in Canton became legendary. She disembarked unarmed, accompanied by a delegation of 17 women and children. This move paralyzed the imperial officials. How could they arrest or attack such a procession? With a single gesture, she demonstrated that she had come not to plead, but to negotiate, transforming surrender talks into a meeting between two sovereign powers. She conducted the negotiations personally, coolly, calculatingly, with the same iron will she used to command her fleet. Her demands were unprecedented. Firstly, a full and unconditional amnesty for all her people, almost 80,000 individuals. Secondly, they were all allowed to keep their plunder, essentially their severance package. And thirdly, most importantly, her husband and right-hand man, Zhang Baozai, was to receive a high-ranking position in the Imperial Navy and the right to command his own squadron of 20 ships. In essence, she demanded that the state not merely pardon her, but employ her, integrating her war machine into its own. To everyone's astonishment, the government agreed. The empire was so financially exhausted and morally humiliated that peace on Ching Shih's terms was the lesser of two evils for them. On April 20th, 1810, the Red Flag Fleet was officially disbanded. Ching Shih had won her greatest victory. Without a single shot, by the force of intellect alone, she had made the dragon bow its head. The former Canton prostitute emerged from this war not just free, but fabulously wealthy and undefeated. And she immediately solidified her new status. Ching Shih officially married Zhang Baozai, who had received his high-ranking post, and invested her immense riches into legitimate businesses. According to some accounts, this included a large gambling house in Canton. She lived a long, peaceful, and prosperous life, dying in 1844 at the age of 69, in her own bed, surrounded by her family. This was a conclusion unthinkable for any other pirate in history. Consider the fates of her famous male colleagues. Blackbeard was killed in battle. Captain Kidd and Calico Jack met their end on the gallows. Ching Shih is the only one who defied 3 empires and concluded her career, not on the scaffold, but as a wealthy and respected matron. She achieved the pirate's dream not through plunder, but through systematic management. So why is the name of history's most successful pirate almost erased from the pages, while the names of these failures are known by every child? Perhaps the answer lies in her story being too inconvenient. She doesn't fit the romantic myth of the pirate, a reckless rebel with a bottle of rum and a parrot on his shoulder. Her path isn't Pirates of the Caribbean, it's The Godfather on water. She was too smart, too calculating, too successful. Her genius lay not in chaos, but in its complete eradication. Her success was built on order and bureaucracy, not anarchy and drunken revelry. Ching Shih's story is not just a tale of maritime banditry. It's a universal parable about how intellect, systemic thinking, and strategic flexibility can break any system, even one that seems immutable. And therein lies her main paradox. The greatest pirate in history was a woman who achieved absolute success by destroying the very essence of piracy, anarchy. She replaced it with ruthless, effective order. She didn't play by the world's rules. She made the world play by hers.